You are an embarrassment. My sister shoved a stiff polyester server uniform into my chest. Put this on. If anyone asks, you work here. The heavy scent of imported lilies hung thick in the bridal suite of the most expensive country club in Carmel, Indiana. I am Belinda Martin. I am 29 years old, and I run a highly successful financial consulting firm. But to my 32-year-old sister, Jessica, I was just the family bank. 10 minutes before her grand reception, she looked me up and down. Brent and his family think we come from old money, Jessica snapped. Your off-the-rack dress is an insult to my brand. I looked at my parents. I expected someone to intervene. Instead, my mother smoothed her own designer gown, a gown I had quietly paid for last month, and sighed. Just do it, Belinda. Do not ruin your sister's perfect day. I stood there holding the ugly black vest. The fabric felt cheap and scratchy against my palms. My mother did not make eye contact. My father stared at his polished shoes. For years, I had swallowed my pride to keep the peace in this family. I had paid their mortgages when their hardware store failed. I had funded this exact wedding venue using money I earned working 60-hour weeks. Welcome back to Grape Vengeance. This channel is where quiet women finally get loud. Stories about family betrayal and the exact moment enough becomes enough. If you know what it feels like to be the family ATM, drop a comment below. Tell me your age and where you are listening from, and be sure to subscribe. Now, let me take you back to that bridal suite. Jessica tapped her manicured nails against her crystal champagne flute. The sound echoed in the quiet room. I said, "Put it on Belinda. His parents are waiting outside." I looked at the three of them. I felt a cold, sharp clarity wash over me. The knot of obligation that had lived in my stomach for a decade dissolved. I did not argue. I did not cry. I did not remind my mother that her mortgage was due in 3 days. Shouting matches only give entitled people a chance to play the victim. I simply took the uniform, turned my back on the bride, and walked into the adjoining bathroom. I locked the heavy wooden door behind me. I stripped off my dress and let it fall to the tile floor. I pulled on the stiff black pants. I buttoned the white-collared shirt. I tied the cheap apron tight around my waist. The fabric dug into my sides. The peacekeeper I had been for 29 years died in that bathroom. I looked at my reflection in the mirror. My hands were not shaking. My breathing was slow and steady. I was ready to serve them exactly what they ordered. I pushed through the heavy, swinging metal doors of the bridal suite and stepped directly into the vast, glittering ballroom of the country club. The air was heavy with the expensive scent of imported roses and roasted prime rib. 200 guests filled the room, laughing and clinking crystal flutes. They were drinking vintage champagne that I had personally paid for through my corporate account. I did not grab a silver tray. I did not slip quietly into the dark corners of the service staff. I lifted my chin, kept my back straight, and walked straight down the center aisle, heading directly toward the main mahogany exit doors. Every eye in the room flicked toward me. At table 4, a group of local small business owners sat near the front. These were people I knew well. They were clients who had walked into my office months earlier, facing total bankruptcy. People whose balance sheets and debts I had untangled with my own hands. Sarah, a local bakery owner whose business I had personally saved from liquidation, squinted through her reading glasses at my cheap polyester uniform. Her face dropped in sudden, stunned realization. She did not scream or cause a scene. She simply set her crystal glass down on the white linen tablecloth, picked up her leather purse, and stood up from her chair. The sharp scrape of wood against polished hardwood echoed loudly over the polite notes of the string quartet playing in the corner. Before Sarah could even take a step, her husband stood beside her. At the adjacent table, a group of my college friends and prominent local community leaders paused, looked at my uniform, and pushed their chairs back in unison. The realization spread through the sprawling room like wildfire. People whispered behind cupped hands, necks craned to get a better look at the bride's sister dressed as a common food server. I reached the heavy double doors, pushed them open with both hands, and stepped out into the crisp, cool Indiana night air. Behind me, the sound of scraping chairs multiplied. It became a steady, deafening roar of wooden legs shifting across the floor. I did not have to turn around. I did not need to check behind me. I knew with absolute certainty that the people who actually mattered, the people who respected my hard work and integrity, were following me right out the door.
The gravel path outside crunched loudly under dozens of pairs of expensive shoes. Murmurs of confusion and indignation filled the dark parking lot. I stood by my sedan, my fingers resting on my keychain, when the country club doors flew open with a violent slam. Jessica marched out into the night air. The long train of her $15,000 designer gown dragged heavily across the dirty concrete, picking up dead leaves and dust. Her practiced bridal smile had completely vanished, replaced by a twisted mask of absolute fury. "Where is everyone going?" she shrieked, her voice cracking and echoing off the sleek metal bodies of the parked luxury cars. "Get back inside right now! This is my launch into high society." She pointed a shaking manicured finger directly at my chest. She looked at the crowd of 70 guests milling around the courtyard. "Tell them to go back inside, Belinda. Tell them this is a joke." I looked at my younger sister. I looked past the white lace and the glittering diamond jewelry, stripping away every single excuse I had made for her selfishness over the past 2 decades. "I cannot tell them what to do, Jessica," I said, keeping my tone perfectly level and calm. "I am just the catering staff." I opened my car door and pulled the handle. Sarah rolled down the window of her SUV as she prepared to drive away from the venue. "We know who really built your family, Belinda," she called out clearly through the open glass. "Have a good evening." Jessica fell hard to her knees right there on the concrete, gathering the filthy silk of her expensive dress in her fists and screaming my name into the empty night. I slid into the driver's seat, put the vehicle in gear, and pulled smoothly out of the lot, leaving the wreckage of her grand illusion behind me. But as I drove down the dark highway toward home, my mind raced. The public humiliation was satisfying, but the deeper battle had only just begun. To fully understand why my sister possessed the audacity to hand me a server uniform on her wedding day, you have to understand the financial machine I had spent my entire adult life fueling. At 29 years old, my financial consulting firm managed portfolios for some of the wealthiest families in the region. People trusted my numbers, my audits, and my discretion. My parents, on the other hand, operated a local hardware store that had not turned a single month of net profit in over 6 years. They lived deep in the red, entirely addicted to the superficial appearance of middle-class luxury and social standing. For the last 4 years, I had quietly transferred thousands of dollars from my own savings into their business accounts, just to keep their electricity turned on and their creditors at bay. I had paid the lease on Jessica's imported sports car. I had covered my mother's country club membership dues month after month without missing a beat. I thought I was being a dutiful daughter. I thought I was holding the family together after our grandfather passed away. The blindfold slipped off completely just 2 weeks before the wedding ceremony. I was sitting at my office desk running a routine credit check as part of a personal mortgage pre-approval process for a new home purchase. My eyes scanned the digital report line by line until I stopped cold. A massive $85,000 personal loan had been taken out under my name 3 months prior. I stared at the screen, my heart hammering against my ribs. I pulled up the loan origin documents, downloaded the scanned signature page, and zoomed in on the bottom corner. It was my name, forged in a clumsy imitation of my handwriting. I checked the digital metadata and the originating IP address attached to the electronic submission. The trail did not lead to a bank downtown or a fraudulent online scammer. The IP address traced directly back to my parents' home Wi-Fi network in downtown Indianapolis. My parents had stolen my identity. They had used my spotless credit profile and my hard-earned financial standing to secure a massive cash loan to fund Jessica's luxury wedding and pay off the mounting debts of their failing hardware store.
They had treated my financial life as an unlimited line of credit, attached to a daughter they viewed as a walking ATM. I did not storm into their house that night. I did not call them screaming or throw a tantrum. I knew from years of dealing with corporate fraud that emotional outbursts only gave dishonest people a chance to rewrite the narrative. Instead, I quietly opened a secure digital folder on my work server. I exported the IP logs, downloaded the bank transfer confirmations, and printed out the forged loan application. I kept my mouth shut, smiled through the family fittings, and waited for the right moment to spring the trap. The wedding disaster was the spark, but the audit was the bomb. By Monday morning, the local business community was buzzing with rumors about the mass exodus from the Hawthorne Ballroom. My phone buzzed continuously on my desk, lighting up with frantic text messages and missed calls from my mother. She demanded that I drop everything and drive immediately to the hardware store to explain myself and fix the social wreckage. I ignored her texts. I picked up the thick manila folder containing the forensic digital evidence, walked out of my office, and drove straight to the downtown police precinct. I sat across the desk from a senior financial crimes detective for an hour, walking him through every document, every forged signature, and every unauthorized transaction. I filed an official, legally binding police report for felony identity theft and corporate fraud. From there, I drove back to my firm, called my bank to implement a permanent security freeze, and sat at my desk to review my schedule. At 11 o'clock sharp, the front glass door of my office swung open with a bang. My parents marched into the reception area as if they still owned the building. My father's face was flushed a deep, unhealthy purple with rage. He strode past my receptionist, ignoring her warnings, and slammed his heavy palm down onto the wooden surface of my desk. "You ruined your sister's life," he bellowed, his voice loud enough to vibrate through the glass walls of my private office. "Brent's family is demanding answers for why half the wedding party walked out behind you like a flock of sheep. You are going to call his father right now, Belinda, and tell him you suffered a severe mental breakdown and hallucinated the whole thing." I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice to match his childish shouting. I remained seated in my ergonomic chair, pulled a single crisp piece of paper from the manila folder, and slid it across the mahogany surface toward him. "I am not calling anyone," I said softly, looking him directly in the eye. "But the Financial Crimes Division of the police department will likely be calling you very soon." My father looked down at the paper. The angry red color rapidly drained from his face, leaving his skin a pale, sickly gray. He read the bold header at the top of the official police report, his hands beginning to tremble as he realized what he was holding. He dropped the document onto the desk as if it were burning hot coals. "You reported your own flesh and blood to the cops over a simple family misunderstanding." My mother gasped, rushing forward and clutching her pearls near her throat. "Where is your loyalty, Belinda? How could you do this to your own family over money?" Before I could answer her hysterical question, the desk phone between us rang with a sharp, insistent chime. My receptionist's voice came through the intercom speaker, sounding slightly strained. "Belinda, line 1 is for you. It is Richard Warren. He says it is urgent." My parents froze instantly. All the righteous anger vanished from their expressions, replaced by a sudden, suffocating panic. They stared at me with wide, terrified eyes, silently mouthing pleas for me to hang up the phone. For 29 years, I had shielded them from the consequences of their financial recklessness. I had always been their human shield. I pressed the speakerphone button so the audio filled the entire room, ensuring my parents could hear every single word of the conversation that was about to change our lives forever. The gravel crunched beneath 70 pairs of expensive dress shoes. The crisp October wind cut through the thin polyester fabric of my catering uniform, but I did not shiver. I stood next to my sedan and watched the bride's side of the guest list dissolve into the dark. Engines roared to life across the lot. Headlights swept over the manicured hedges and stone pillars of the country club. My clients, my friends, and the community leaders I had spent years advising were loading into their vehicles. They did not ask questions. They did not demand explanations. They saw my sister hand me a black apron. They watched my parents nod in silent approval, and they chose their allegiance without hesitation. Before I could unlock my car door, heavy footsteps crunched rapidly behind me. My Uncle David grabbed my shoulder. He squeezed hard, trying to spin me around to face him. David ran the regional supply warehouse that kept my parents' failing hardware store stocked with inventory. I had personally guaranteed his business loan 3 years ago when the bank threatened to repossess his delivery trucks. "What are you doing, Belinda?" he hissed, his face flushed red from the open bar. "Get back inside and put your real dress on. You are humiliating your parents in front of the Warren family. Do you have any idea how much money is sitting in that room right now?" I stepped out of his grip. I looked at the man who drank my expensive liquor while demanding my blind obedience. "I am not changing clothes," I said, "and if you ever put your hands on me again, I will withdraw my financial guarantee on your warehouse credit line by Monday morning. I will let the bank take your trucks. Let us see how long your business survives without my signature holding it together." David dropped his hand immediately. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. He took a long step backward, terrified of losing his financial safety net. He turned and scurried back toward the building, abandoning his loyalty to my sister the second his own wallet was threatened. Just as David retreated, the heavy oak doors of the club burst outward. They hit the brick exterior with a sharp crack. Jessica stood in the entryway. The warm, golden light from the ballroom spilled out around her, outlining her $15,000 silk gown. The dress was a masterpiece of imported lace and seed pearls, but the woman wearing it looked like a feral animal trapped in a cage. Her curated bridal smile was gone, replaced by a twisted, frantic grimace. She marched down the concrete steps. The long white train of her gown dragged through the dirt and wet gravel. She ignored the mud staining her hem. She ignored the wide eyes of the valet staff standing near the curb. She locked her gaze onto me and marched across the lot. "Where is everyone going?" she shrieked. Her voice echoed off the sleek metal bodies of the luxury cars, shrill and desperate. "Get back inside, all of you. This is my launch into high society. You are ruining my brand." None of the departing guests stopped. A few rolled up their tinted windows. The public rejection sent Jessica into a spiral. She stopped 10 feet from my car and pointed a shaking, manicured finger at my chest. "Tell them to go back, Belinda. Tell them this is a planned prank. Tell them to sit down and eat their meals right now." I leaned against the cool metal of my car door. I looked at my younger sister. I stripped away the decades of excuses I had made for her endless vanity. I stopped seeing a sibling who needed my help to succeed. I saw a parasite who thought she could drain my bank account and still treat me like dirt. "I cannot tell them what to do, Jessica," I said calmly. "I am just the catering staff. Servers do not give orders to the important guests." Jessica took a step forward, her face turning a deep crimson. "You owe me this night. I am the bride. Brent's parents are watching everything we do. If you do not march back in there and fix this public relations disaster, I will make sure you never speak to our parents again." The threat hung in the cool night air. She actually believed losing my parents was a punishment. She did not realize it was the exact prize I had been waiting to claim. Before I could answer her childish demand, the club doors opened a second time. Brent stepped out onto the stone patio. The groom looked bewildered. His father, Richard, followed close behind him. Richard was a ruthless commercial real estate developer who built his empire by spotting weak investments and walking away from bad deals. Right now, he was looking at my sister and seeing a very bad investment. "Jessica," Brent called out, his voice laced with confusion. "Why is half the ballroom empty? The catering manager is asking, who is going to pay for the untouched prime rib plates?" Jessica spun around, her voice suddenly dropping an octave to sound sweet and fragile. "It is just a minor misunderstanding, Brent. Belinda is having one of her mental episodes. She got confused and tried to leave, and some people got worried. I am handling it." She lied effortlessly. She spun a fabricated medical history right there in the parking lot to save her own skin. But her audience was no longer playing along with her narrative. A large black SUV pulled up slowly beside where we stood. Sarah, the bakery owner whose business I had rescued from foreclosure, rolled down her passenger window. She did not look at Jessica. She did not look at the confused groom. She looked directly at me.
"We know who really built your family, Belinda," Sarah called out. Her voice carried clearly across the quiet lot, reaching the ears of the groom and his father. "We know whose money bought that dress. Call me Monday morning. I am baking you a cake to celebrate your freedom." Sarah rolled her window up and drove toward the exit. The truth hung over the gravel like heavy smoke. Richard stepped forward to the edge of the patio, his eyes narrowing as he stared at the bride. He did not ask any questions, but the suspicion was permanently planted in his mind. The foundation of her new marriage was already fracturing. Jessica realized the illusion was cracking in real time. Her knees buckled. She dropped straight down onto the dirty concrete. The pristine silk dress pooled around her in the dark mud. She grabbed the fabric in her fists, tilted her head back, and screamed my name into the night sky. It was not a cry of sorrow. It was the enraged shriek of a woman who just lost control of her primary funding source. I did not rush forward to help her up. I did not kneel in the dirt to offer her comfort. I opened my car door and slid into the driver's seat. I shut the heavy door, sealing out the sound of her crying. The cabin of my car was quiet, smelling faintly of old leather and peace. I put the key in the ignition, but I did not start the engine yet. I pulled my phone from my purse. My sister thought the worst thing I could do was leave her party. She was wrong. I opened my banking application. My thumb hovered over the glowing screen. I navigated to the corporate credit card tied to the country club open bar and the remaining catering balance. I tapped the screen once. I reported the card as compromised and froze the account instantly. The venue manager would be walking out to that patio in exactly 10 minutes to tell the groom that the bride's credit line was declining. I put the car in drive. I steered toward the exit, my headlights sweeping across my sister, kneeling in the dirt, and her new husband staring at her in horror. I merged onto the dark highway, heading back toward the city limits. The uniform scratched my skin, but I had never felt so comfortable in my entire life. I knew the phone calls would start tomorrow. My parents would demand cash to fix the mess. Jessica would demand public apologies to save her reputation. They thought this was the end of the drama. They had no idea I was sitting on the receipts for an $85,000 forged personal loan. The real conflict had only just begun. The dashboard clock glowed a pale blue in the dark cabin of my sedan. The numbers flipped to 11:30. My cell phone sat in the passenger seat, lighting up every 10 seconds with incoming calls. My mother, my father, Jessica, Uncle David. I kept my eyes on the empty highway. I let the phone vibrate until the battery finally died, plunging the car into silence. They were trapped at a luxury country club with an unpaid catering bill and a frozen credit card. I was finally heading home, leaving the wreckage of their manufactured high society launch in my rearview mirror. To truly understand why my younger sister possessed the sheer audacity to hand me a server uniform on her wedding day, you must understand the financial machine I was forced to build. I am 29 years old. I operate a highly profitable financial consulting firm in the heart of the city. I manage portfolios, handle risk assessments, and balance the ledgers for some of the wealthiest residents in Indiana. My clients trust my discretion and my exactness. I built my empire through relentless discipline and grueling 60-hour work weeks. My parents, on the other hand, operate a local hardware store on the edge of town. They love the title of small business owners. They love wearing custom-embroidered polo shirts and attending the regional commerce banquets. But the reality behind their storefront is grim. Their business has not turned a net profit in 6 years. Their shelves are half empty, and their vendors constantly threaten legal action over unpaid invoices. They live drowning in red ink, hopelessly addicted to the hollow illusion of upper-class status. For the last 4 years, I functioned as their secret life support system. I transferred thousands of dollars a month from my personal savings accounts into their failing business just to keep the lights on and the doors open.
When their commercial suppliers hired collection agencies, I quietly wrote the checks to settle the debts. When my mother refused to cancel her expensive country club membership because she needed to play tennis with the wives of local surgeons, I paid the monthly dues without complaint. I even financed the facade my sister used to trap her new husband. Jessica worked as a part-time receptionist at a tanning salon, but she drove a European luxury SUV. I paid that expensive lease every single month. Brent came from a prominent commercial real estate family. His father, Richard, owned half the premium retail space in our county. Jessica desperately needed Brent to believe she was his equal. She spun a fabricated web of lies, claiming she was a silent partner in my accounting firm and that our parents were multimillionaire real estate investors. I kept my mouth shut and funded their delusions because I believed family meant sacrifice. I thought I was honoring our grandparents' legacy by keeping the hardware store afloat. I absorbed their financial failures so they could sleep peacefully at night. I acted as the ultimate shock absorber. But 2 weeks before the wedding ceremony, the blindfold ripped off. I was sitting in my quiet corner office on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. The weather outside was gray and heavy. I was preparing to purchase my own custom home, having spent years saving a substantial down payment for a beautiful piece of land just outside the city limits. I opened my secure email client to review the preliminary mortgage approval documents sent by my broker. I scrolled down to the standard credit check attachment. My eyes scanned the familiar rows of on-time payments, excellent scores, and zero balances. Then my gaze hit a staggering anomaly near the bottom of the page. An unsecured personal loan sat right in the middle of my pristine report. The principal amount read $85,000. I stopped breathing. The air in my office grew very thin. I did not possess an $85 personal loan. I picked up my desk phone and dialed the direct fraud line for the bank listed on the report. I demanded the original origination files. Because of my industry credentials, a secure digital package arrived in my inbox within the hour. I opened the PDF file. It was a standard high-yield loan application. The employment history listed my consulting firm. The income section stated my exact annual salary down to the penny. I scrolled to the final page to view the digital authorization. A signature sat on the bottom line. It was my name, but the loops and slants were entirely wrong. It was a clumsy, desperate forgery. I am a financial consultant. I trace hidden assets and uncover corporate embezzlement for a living. I did not panic. I initiated a forensic digital trace on the electronic signature metadata. Every digital document carries a footprint, a permanent trail of crumbs leading back to the source. The banking representative provided the exact internet protocol address used to submit the forged application. I typed the tracking numbers into an IP location database. A map loaded on my monitor. A red pin dropped directly onto a familiar residential street in downtown Indianapolis. The pin pointed squarely to my parents' living room router. They had stolen my identity. The people who raised me used my pristine credit profile and my hard-earned professional standing to secure a staggering cash payout. They committed a federal felony to buy ice sculptures, imported lilies, and a designer silk gown for Jessica. They treated my livelihood as collateral damage for a single extravagant party. I sat in my quiet office and stared at the red pin glowing on the screen. I felt a cold, jagged realization pierce my chest. They did not love me. They loved the financial access I provided. I was not a daughter to them. I was a limitless, unsecured credit line. I did not leave work early. I did not drive to their house and kick the front door open. Screaming matches only provide manipulative people with an opportunity to cry, deflect blame, and play the victim. If I confronted them without a solid plan, they would beg. They would guilt-trip me, and they would demand I assume the debt to save the family reputation. I chose a different path. I opened a secure encrypted folder on my private server. I named the file The Wedding Audit. I systematically downloaded every single piece of evidence. I saved the IP tracking logs. I exported the forged signature pages. I pulled 4 years of bank transfer receipts, proving I had kept their hardware store out of bankruptcy. I compiled every text message from my mother demanding more cash for the wedding caterer. I printed everything out and organized it into a thick, heavily tabbed physical binder. Over the next 14 days, I lived a double life. I attended the final bridal shower. I smiled while my mother showed off her new, expensive shoes, knowing she bought them with stolen funds. I sat through the rehearsal dinner while Jessica bragged about her custom floral arrangements, knowing my stolen identity paid the florist. I watched them celebrate their grand theft while the trap sat patiently on my desk. They truly believed I was oblivious. They felt so invincible, so entitled to my resources, that Jessica thought nothing of handing me a cheap catering uniform on the day of the ceremony. She thought I would just swallow the insult, serve her guests, and continue paying her bills forever. She had no idea she was handing me the exact key I needed to unlock my cage. As I parked my sedan in my quiet driveway after walking out of the country club, I felt zero regret. I walked up my front steps, unlocked the door, and stepped into my dark kitchen. I poured a glass of cold water and leaned against the granite counter. The wedding was over. The charade was dead. Tomorrow was Monday morning. The banks would open. The police precincts would unlock their front doors. My parents were about to wake up to a world where I no longer translated their bad behavior into harmless quirks. They were about to learn what happens when the family bank decides to call in the debts. The sun rose on Monday morning over a town buzzing with fresh gossip. By 8 o'clock, the fallout from the Hawthorne Country Club was already the main topic of conversation in every coffee shop, salon, and bank lobby in our affluent suburb. Wealthy clients and local business owners were trading stories about the bride's sister walking out in a catering uniform and taking half the guest list with her. My cell phone sat on my kitchen island, buzzing relentlessly against the cold granite countertop. I picked the device up and read the steady stream of incoming text messages from my mother. She did not ask how I was feeling. She did not express a single ounce of remorse for watching Jessica hand me that degrading black apron. She simply demanded I drive to their failing hardware store immediately to face my punishment. She typed that I needed to explain my childish stunt to the family. She insisted I owed the bride a public apology before noon. The final message ordered me to bring my personal checkbook to cover the penalty fees for the untouched prime rib plates. I read her demands while sipping my black coffee. I did not type a reply. I did not engage in a futile debate. I deleted the conversation thread and turned my phone on silent. I walked into my home office and picked up the thick binder I had methodically assembled over the past 2 weeks. The heavy spine contained every piece of forensic evidence I needed to dismantle their lies. I flipped through the pages one last time. Internet protocol tracking logs, forged loan applications, 4 years of bank transfer receipts proving I kept their business afloat. I placed the binder carefully into my leather briefcase. I walked out to my car and started the engine. I did not drive toward the hardware store to beg for forgiveness. I merged onto the highway and headed straight for the downtown police precinct. The precinct lobby smelled of stale coffee and industrial floor cleaner. I approached the front desk, presented my identification, and requested to speak with a detective in the Financial Crimes Division. 10 minutes later, I sat across a dented metal desk from a tired-looking investigator named Detective Miller. He held a pen loosely in his hand, expecting a routine credit card dispute or a minor check bouncing issue. I unzipped my briefcase and slid the heavy binder across the scarred metal surface. I opened the cover and walked him through the timeline. I showed him the forged $85,000 personal loan. I pointed to the signature line showing how the loops and slants failed to match my driver license on file. Then I turned the page to the exact digital footprint, tracing the fraudulent application back to my parents' home internet router. I handed him a notarized affidavit declaring identity theft. Detective Miller stopped taking notes. He sat up straight and looked at me with a grim, serious expression. He explained that stealing $85,000 was a major federal offense. He warned me that filing the official report would trigger a criminal investigation against my own parents, likely leading to their arrest. He asked if I was prepared to send my family to jail. I looked at the detective. I thought about the server uniform. I thought about the decades of emotional blackmail that drained savings accounts and the constant disrespect. I picked up the blue ink pen and signed my name on the formal police report. I pushed the paper back across the desk. The state of Indiana was now officially investigating my family for wire fraud and identity theft. The trap was set and locked. I left the precinct and drove to my consulting firm. My employees were already working quietly at their desks, reviewing tax codes and investment portfolios. The atmosphere in my office was always professional and grounded. It was a sanctuary I built from scratch. I closed the door to my private suite, sat at my desk, and spent the next hour on the phone with the major credit bureaus. I initiated a hard security freeze on my Social Security number. I locked down every financial avenue my family could possibly use to drain my accounts. I secured my perimeter. I sat back in my ergonomic chair and took a deep breath. For the first time in my life, my money belonged solely to me. The clock on my wall ticked past 11. The quiet hum of my firm shattered when the front glass doors swung open hard enough to hit the heavy metal doorstop. I heard loud, angry voices in the reception area. My young front desk assistant tried to ask for their names, but they ignored her entirely. I stood up from my desk just as my parents barged past her and stormed into my private suite. My father led the charge. He was wearing his custom-embroidered hardware store polo shirt, but his face was flushed a deep, unhealthy shade of red. His breathing was heavy and ragged from marching up the stairs. My mother trailed closely behind him, clutching her expensive leather purse and wearing her usual expression of curated victimhood. My father marched right up to my mahogany desk and slammed his palm down hard on the polished wood. "You ruined your sister's life," he yelled, his voice echoing loudly through the glass walls of my office suite. Brent's family is demanding answers. Richard Warren is threatening to cancel the honeymoon fund because half the wedding guests walked out behind you. You humiliated us in front of the most powerful people in town. We spent years building our reputation, and you threw it away for a petty grudge. My mother stepped forward, pointing a trembling, manicured finger at me. "You are going to call Brent's father right now," she hissed. "You are going to tell Richard that you had a severe mental breakdown. You will tell him you stopped taking your medication and hallucinated the entire thing. You will tell him you wore that uniform because you were confused. You will fix this, Belinda, or you are no longer a part of this family." They stood there in my office, demanding I sacrifice my professional reputation and my sanity to save their fragile social standing. They expected me to shrink, apologize, and accept the blame, just like I had done since childhood. I did not raise my voice. I did not defend my mental health. I simply reached into my briefcase and pulled out a stamped, verified copy of the formal police report. I walked around my desk and handed the document directly to my father. "I am not calling anyone," I said, keeping my tone perfectly even and cold, "but the financial fraud department will be calling you." My father looked down at the paper. He read the bold header from the police department and the listed felony fraud charges. The angry, flushed color drained from his face in a matter of seconds. His hands began to shake. He dropped the report onto my desk as if the paper itself burned his fingers. My mother peered over his shoulder, her eyes widening in sudden, suffocating panic as she read the words, "identity theft." Before my mother could even open her mouth to scream, the phone on my desk chimed. My receptionist spoke through the intercom, her voice tight with nervous energy. "Belinda, Richard Warren is on line 1. He says it is an emergency and he needs to speak with you immediately." The color drained from my father's face as he read the bold letters at the top of the police report. He dropped the paper onto my desk as if the document itself were on fire. The crisp white sheet settled over my clean leather desk pad. His hands hovered in the air, shaking. My mother stepped forward, her eyes darting from the formal felony charges to my face. "You reported your own flesh and blood to the cops?" she gasped. Her hand flew to her throat, her fingers digging into her expensive pearl necklace. "Over a simple misunderstanding? You are trying to send us to prison over a wedding loan?" Before I could answer her absurd question, the phone on my desk chimed again. My receptionist had just announced Richard Warren on line 1. The name hung in the tense air of my private suite. Richard was the patriarch of the Warren commercial real estate empire. He was a man who owned half the premium retail space in the state. He was the man my sister had spent 2 years manipulating so she could secure her place in high society. My parents froze. Their eyes widened with sudden, suffocating panic. They knew exactly why Richard was calling. They had spent the entire morning dodging his phone calls. They knew their fabricated wealth was crumbling. "Do not answer it," my father whispered. His voice was hoarse. His previous rage had evaporated, replaced by raw terror. "Tell your receptionist to send him to voicemail. We need time to figure out a story." I did not touch the receiver. I looked at the 2 people standing in my office. For 29 years, I had covered for them. I had been their shield. I had paid their overdue bills, covered their bounced checks, and smiled through their public insults. They expected me to protect their lies one more time. My mother leaned over my desk. She silently mouthed the word, "Please." Tears pooled in her eyes, smudging her expensive mascara. It was the exact same manipulative expression she used whenever she needed me to empty my savings account to save their failing hardware store. I reached out and pressed the green speakerphone button. The connection clicked loudly in the quiet room. "Belinda," Richard said. His voice was cold sharp and carried the effortless authority of a man who never had to repeat himself. "Good morning, Richard," I replied, keeping my tone perfectly professional and calm. "How can I help you today?" My son's wedding was a circus, Richard stated. He bypassed the polite small talk entirely. The catering manager approached Brent last night during the reception. He informed my son that the bride's corporate credit card had been frozen. The venue was threatening to call the local news and report that the Warren family was skipping out on a bill. I had to pull out my personal checkbook and hand the manager a cashier's check just to keep the police from arriving at my son's reception. My father flinched. He stared at the floor, his face pale and slick with nervous sweat. My mother covered her mouth with both hands to muffle a sob. They were hearing the real-time destruction of their social facade. "I am very sorry you had to deal with that, Richard," I said. "That sounds incredibly stressful." "It goes far beyond stressful." Belinda, the older man, continued, his anger radiating through the small desktop speaker. "Jessica is currently locked in a guest bedroom at my house. She has been crying for 12 hours. She refuses to come out, and she refuses to show my son any of her bank statements. We tried to call your parents this morning to settle the financial confusion. They are sending all of my calls straight to voicemail. They are hiding." He paused. The silence on the line was heavy and demanding. "You manage money for a living," Belinda, Richard said. "You run a consulting firm. Jessica told us she is a silent partner in your business. She told us your parents are sitting on a massive real estate portfolio. I need to know exactly what is going on with your family's finances right now. If my son is legally tied to a sinking ship, I need to know before the ink on the marriage license dries." My mother reached across the desk. Her manicured fingers clawed at the plastic casing of the phone. She wanted to hit the mute button. She wanted to cut the line and preserve the lie. I caught her wrist in midair. I did not squeeze hard, but I held her arm firmly in place. I looked her directly in the eyes. I let her see that I was no longer the obedient daughter she could control. I released her wrist, and she pulled her hand back, stepping away from the desk as if she had been burned. I looked at my parents, pressed my finger near the microphone so my voice would carry clearly, and delivered the final blow to their manufactured reality. "Richard," I said, "I would be happy to meet with you this afternoon. Come to my office at 2 o'clock and bring your legal counsel." The line went dead quiet for 3 long seconds. Richard was a smart businessman. He heard the words legal counsel and immediately understood that the situation was far worse than an unpaid catering bill. "We will be there," Richard replied. He disconnected the call. The dial tone hummed in my quiet office suite. I pressed the button to end the dial tone. I sat back in my ergonomic chair and folded my hands on the leather desk pad. I looked at the two people standing on the other side of the mahogany wood. My father was hyperventilating. His chest heaved under his custom-embroidered shirt. "You just destroyed your sister," he gasped. "You just signed her divorce papers. Richard is going to tear her apart. They are going to demand an annulment." "I did not destroy anything," I replied evenly. "Jessica built a house out of matches. I just stopped shielding it from the wind." My mother began to weep loudly. She paced back and forth across my office rug. "How could you do this to us, Belinda?" she cried. "We are your parents. We raised you. You have millions of dollars in your corporate accounts. You could have just paid off the personal loan. You could have just transferred the funds to cover the catering bill. $85,000 is nothing to you. Why are you acting so selfishly?" I looked at the woman who had watched her favorite daughter hand me a server uniform in front of 200 guests. I remembered the heavy, suffocating scent of the lilies in the bridal suite. I remembered the smug smile on my sister's face. "I am not a bank," I said, "and I am not a catering server. I am the victim of felony identity theft, and as of this morning, I am a cooperating witness in a federal fraud investigation." My father stepped toward the desk again. He raised a shaking finger. "I will disown you," he threatened. His voice cracked with desperation. "If you show Richard Warren those files, you are no longer a part of this family. You will never set foot in our house again. You will never see your sister again. We will cut you out entirely." He thought isolation was a weapon. He thought the threat of losing my toxic family would force me to surrender the evidence. He did not realize he was offering me the exact prize I had been waiting for my entire adult life. I stood up from my chair. I picked up the police report and slid it back into my heavy leather briefcase. I looked my father in the eye. "You do not have a house to ban me from," I told him. "You have a heavily mortgaged property that is 3 months behind on payments. You do not have a family to cut me out from. You have a failing retail store and a mountain of unpaid debt. And as for your threats, I suggest you save your breath. You are going to need it when the authorities arrive at your hardware store to audit your business accounts." I pressed the intercom button on my phone. "Susan," I said to my receptionist, "please escort these 2 individuals out of the building. If they refuse to leave the premises, immediately call building security and have them removed for trespassing." My parents stared at me in stunned silence. They had never heard me speak to them with such cold, unyielding authority. They had spent 29 years walking all over my boundaries. Now they were hitting a solid brick wall. My father opened his mouth to argue, but the heavy glass door of my suite swung open. 2 uniformed security guards from the lobby stood in the doorway. My receptionist had clearly heard the shouting and decided not to handle the eviction by herself. "Ma'am, sir," one of the guards said, gesturing toward the hallway, "it is time to leave." My mother grabbed her expensive purse. She shot me a look of pure, unadulterated hatred. "You will regret this, Belinda," she hissed. "You are going to end up alone." They turned and walked out of my office, flanked by the security guards. I watched them march down the hallway and step into the elevator. The metal doors slid shut, severing the final string of obligation I felt toward the people who raised me. I sat back down at my desk. The room was quiet again. I had 2 hours before Richard Warren and his corporate attorney arrived. I opened my secure server and began printing out the color-coded financial dossiers. I printed the forged loan documents, the IP tracking logs, and the decade of bank transfers showing my endless bailouts of their hardware store. I placed the papers neatly into crisp, professional presentation folders. Jessica had spent 2 years telling the Warren family that she was a wealthy silent partner in my consulting firm. She had sold them a fairy tale of generational wealth and endless resources. At 2 o'clock, I was going to hand the patriarch of the Warren Empire the exact blueprints of her lies. The old money was about to meet the cold, hard reality of the new evidence. And the consequences were going to be swift. The grandfather clock in my reception area struck 2. The heavy glass doors opened. Richard Warren walked in. He wore a tailored charcoal suit. His posture was rigid. An older man carrying a thick leather briefcase trailed half a step behind him. This was his corporate attorney. These were men who bought city blocks before breakfast. They were accustomed to apologies, concessions, and people bending to their will. My receptionist pointed them toward my suite. I stood up behind my desk and gestured to the 2 leather guest chairs. Richard did not extend his hand for a greeting. He sat down and crossed his ankles. The attorney took the seat next to him and placed his briefcase on his lap. The silence in my office felt thick and heavy. Richard looked around the room. He took in the mahogany shelves, the framed credentials, and the pristine order of my workspace. He expected a frantic, weeping woman trying to salvage her family reputation. I did not give him a frantic woman. I offered them black coffee. Both men declined. I reached across my desk and slid a thick, color-coded financial dossier toward Richard. The tabbed sections were perfectly aligned. Your son married into a lie, I stated plainly, keeping my voice even. I am not going to waste your time with excuses or apologies for my family. My parents do not possess generational wealth. They are functionally bankrupt. That entire wedding was funded through felony identity theft. Richard did not flinch, but he did not touch the folder either. He nodded to his attorney. The lawyer unclasped the binder and flipped it open. The first page contained the police report I had filed that morning. The second page held the forged loan application. The lawyer adjusted his glasses. The rustle of the heavy paper was the only sound in the room. He traced the forged signature with his index finger. He compared it to a copy of my real signature on my business license. He spent several minutes reading the Internet Protocol tracking logs. The attorney leaned closer to Richard and whispered that the data was authentic. The origin point was their residential address. Richard shifted his weight. His jaw tightened. The cool, detached demeanor of a billionaire began to crack. He looked at me, his eyes narrowing. Jessica told Brent she was a silent partner in your accounting firm, he said. She claimed she owned half the equity in this building. She told us the local hardware store was just a front for a highly profitable commercial real estate portfolio your parents managed. She said they owned warehouses across the Midwest. I shook my head slowly. I felt a surge of pity for the groom. Jessica is a part-time receptionist at a local tanning salon, I replied. She makes $13 an hour. She does not own a single share of my firm. I built this business from the ground up while she was taking vacations on my dime. As for the hardware store, they rent the building. They do not own the property. In fact, the business is facing foreclosure next month. I stopped paying their commercial mortgage last Friday. The attorney turned to the next section of the binder. I had included 4 years of bank transfer receipts. Look at the yellow tabs, I instructed the lawyer. Those are direct deposits from my personal savings account into my parents' business checking account. Hundreds of transactions. I kept their lights on. I paid their vendors. I even paid the lease on the luxury vehicle Jessica drives. I stopped funding their facade 2 weeks ago when I discovered the forged loan. They panicked. They needed a grand exit, so they threw an extravagant wedding, hoping your family money would cover their tracks forever. The lawyer cleared his throat and asked how my parents obtained my secure personal information to forge the documents. I explained that I had trusted them with my sensitive documents when I was in college. I kept a safety deposit box key at their house. They violated that basic trust to open illicit accounts. I described the feeling of discovering the betrayal. I kept the emotion out of my voice, presenting the facts like a prosecutor laying out a timeline. I told them how my father had stood in this very room 2 hours ago, demanding I claim insanity to cover up their crimes. I watched Richard's face harden as I recounted the hardware store confrontation. Wealthy families despise public scandal, but they despise thieves even more. Richard asked if Jessica knew about the forged loan. I pointed to the final tab in the folder. It contained a printout of an email chain. Jessica had emailed my mother 3 days before the loan approval, explicitly asking if the new funds had cleared the bank yet so she could pay the florist. Jessica was not an innocent bystander. She was an active participant in the fraud.
Richard listened to every word. He did not interrupt. He was a man who calculated risk for a living. He was currently realizing his son had merged his life with a parasite. He looked at the bank statements. He saw the truth in the numbers. Numbers do not lie. Numbers do not care about bridal gowns or high society launches. The math showed a family drowning in debt and resorting to criminal fraud to stay afloat. "What is your end game here?" Belinda Richard asked. He leaned forward and rested his elbows on the armrests of his chair. "Why are you handing me the weapon to dismantle your own sister? Are you looking for a payoff? Do you want my firm to cover the $85,000 debt to keep this quiet?" I looked the wealthy patriarch right in the eyes. "I do not want your money, Richard. I want my name cleared. I filed the police report this morning because I refuse to be held liable for their crimes. I am handing you this file because your son is a victim of the exact same fraud I am." Jessica planned to use Brent's trust fund to pay off my stolen loan before I ever noticed it was missing. She was going to drain your family to save hers. I am not trying to destroy my sister. She destroyed herself. I am just refusing to clean up the wreckage. The attorney closed the dossier with a sharp snap. The sound echoed in the quiet room. He looked at Richard and gave a single, definitive nod. The lawyer knew a watertight case when he saw one. My documentation was flawless. There were no loopholes. There was no room for Jessica to spin another fairy tale. The illusion was shattered. Richard placed his hands on his knees and pushed himself up from the heavy leather chair. He stood tall, buttoning the center button of his charcoal suit jacket. He did not yell. He did not threaten to sue me. He reached out and extended his right hand. I stood up and shook it. The grip was firm and respectful. "Thank you for your transparency," Belinda Richard said. His voice was grim, holding a dark promise of impending action. "You have saved my family a tremendous amount of future grief. We will handle the situation on our end." The two men turned and walked out of my office. They left the color-coded dossier sitting on my desk. They did not need to take the paper copies. They had seen enough. The wheels of a corporate divorce were now in motion. Richard was going to return to his estate, walk into the guest bedroom, and confront a bride who had built her entire existence on a foundation of stolen credit and forged signatures. As the glass doors clicked shut behind them, I walked over to the window and looked out at the city streets below. I had just handed a billionaire the exact tools he needed to evict my sister from her manufactured fairy tale. The old Belinda would have felt guilty. The old Belinda would have tried to soften the blow. But the woman standing by the window felt nothing but a profound sense of peace. The truth was finally out in the open, walking down the sidewalk in a tailored charcoal suit. My sister thought she could use my money to buy her way into a new life. She forgot that the people she was trying to impress built their fortunes by spotting bad investments and cutting their losses. The financial reckoning was underway, but Jessica was not the type of person to surrender gracefully. When a narcissist loses their mask, they do not apologize. They go on the offensive. The legal battle was just beginning, and the court of public opinion was about to become a battleground. When a narcissist loses their mask, they do not apologize. They go on the offensive. By Wednesday morning, the quiet tension in my life shattered into a digital spectacle. I was sitting at my kitchen island, sipping a cup of dark roast coffee and reviewing a client portfolio on my tablet. My phone sat next to my mug. At exactly 8:15, it vibrated. Then it buzzed again. 10 seconds later, a continuous stream of notifications lit up the screen. The device practically danced across the granite countertop. I set my mug down and picked up the phone. I expected a few angry texts from my father. Instead, I saw 40 new notifications across 3 different social media platforms. Direct messages from distant cousins I had not spoken to in 5 years. Comments from my mother's country club friends. Text messages from aunts and uncles calling me a monster, a traitor, and a jealous spinster. I opened the primary application and saw the source of the firestorm. Jessica had launched a full-scale public smear campaign. She posted a highly produced, heavily edited video to her main feed. She sat on the edge of a pristine white sofa, wearing an oversized beige sweater that made her look small and fragile. Her hair was pulled back into a messy bun, and her makeup was expertly applied to simulate recent crime. Red-rimmed eyes, pale lips, trembling chin. It was a masterclass in manipulation. I tapped the screen and watched my sister lie to thousands of people. "I never thought I would have to make a video like this," Jessica whispered into the camera, her voice breaking on cue. She wiped an invisible tear from her cheek. "But my family is going through an unimaginable trauma, and I need to share the truth before the rumors destroy us." She took a shaky breath. "My older sister, Belinda, tried to ruin my wedding on Saturday. She is deeply unwell and bitterly jealous of my happiness. I have spent years trying to help her find love, but she resents my marriage to Brent. She showed up to my reception wearing a staff uniform just to humiliate me and my new husband." I watched the screen, my expression neutral. The story was predictable. But then Jessica took the narrative a step further, crossing a dangerous legal line. "The real tragedy is what Belinda has done to our parents." Jessica continued, looking directly into the lens. "For years, my parents' hardware store has been struggling. We thought it was just the economy, but we recently discovered the truth. Belinda manages their books. She has been secretly embezzling money from the family business for half a decade. She drained their retirement funds to build her own consulting firm. She stole from the people who raised her." I paused the video. The audacity was breathtaking. She did not just paint me as a bitter sibling. She accused a licensed financial consultant of corporate embezzlement in a public forum. She weaponized my career to cover up her own felony identity theft. I scrolled down to the comments section. The engagement was staggering. Hundreds of people were expressing their outrage. My mother had shared the video to her own timeline within minutes of it going live. She added a long, heartbreaking caption. "A mother's worst nightmare is watching one child destroy another. We are praying for Belinda to find peace, but we must protect our business and our surviving daughter from her toxic behavior. Thank you for the grace and support during this dark time." The bait was dangling right in front of me. They wanted me to engage. They desperately needed me to jump into the comments section and start defending myself. They wanted a screaming match in the digital town square to validate their victimhood. If I argued back, I would look defensive and unhinged. If I posted the truth, they would claim I was fabricating lies to cover my tracks. I did not type a single word. I did not post a rebuttal. I did not defend my character to distant relatives who never bothered to check the facts. I closed the social media application and opened my contact list. I dialed the number for Marcus Vance, the premier defamation and corporate liability attorney in Indianapolis. He answered on the second ring. "Good morning, Belinda," Marcus said. "Good morning, Marcus," I replied. "I need you to open a new file. My sister just published a video accusing me of corporate embezzlement and theft. My mother is actively distributing the video to local business owners. They are attempting to destroy my professional consulting license." "Send me the link right now," Marcus instructed, his tone shifting into immediate professional gear. "Do not interact with the post. Do not text them." I forwarded the link to his email address. Marcus watched the video while I stayed on the line. I heard him sigh heavily through the receiver. "This is textbook defamation per se," he stated. "She is explicitly accusing a licensed financial professional of a crime that directly damages your trade and livelihood. The damages here are presumed by law." "I have the bank records proving I funded their business," I reminded him. "I also have the pending police report for the $85,000 identity theft they committed against me." Marcus chuckled a dry, humorless sound. Belinda, your sister just handed us a golden ticket. She published a documented, time-stamped video demonstrating active intent to ruin your reputation. We are going to draft a cease and desist letter, but we are also preparing a civil suit for defamation and tortious interference. We will demand a public retraction and severe financial damages. Draft it, I said, but hold the delivery until Friday. Let them think they are winning for a few more days. I ended the call with Marcus. Then I opened my secure email client. I composed a new message to Detective Miller at the Financial Crimes Division. I attached the video link and captured screenshots of my mother distributing the false claims. "Good morning, Detective," I typed. "I thought you should see this. The suspects in the identity theft case are currently engaged in a coordinated public smear campaign to discredit me as a witness. They are fabricating a narrative of embezzlement to explain away the missing funds they stole from my credit profile. This video clearly documents their lack of remorse and their active efforts to obstruct the truth." I hit send. Every single public lie Jessica told was just another nail in her own coffin. She thought she was winning the public relations war. She did not realize she was freely providing the police and my legal counsel with irrefutable evidence of her vindictive character. My phone continued to buzz throughout the morning. My Uncle David sent a scathing text message demanding I surrender my firm to my parents as restitution. A few college acquaintances unfriended me. The people who only valued the drama flocked to my sister's fake tears. But the people who truly mattered, the clients whose businesses I had saved, remained entirely silent. Sarah, the bakery owner, sent me a brief text. "Do not let them sweat you, Belinda. We know the truth." I put my phone on silent, dressed in a tailored navy suit, and drove to my office. I walked through the glass doors of my firm at 9 o'clock sharp. My receptionist, Susan, looked up from her desk, her eyes wide with concern. She had clearly seen the video circulating online. "Are you okay, Belinda?" she asked softly. "I am perfectly fine, Susan," I replied, offering her a genuine smile. "Please forward any media inquiries or angry calls from my relatives directly to our legal department. I have a busy schedule today, and I cannot be distracted by amateur theatrics." I spent the entire Wednesday and Thursday working on client portfolios. I ignored the digital noise. The silence from my end drove Jessica into a frenzy. When an entitled person does not get the reaction they crave, they escalate. By Thursday evening, Jessica posted 3 more updates, each one more frantic and desperate than the last. She claimed my silence was proof of my guilt. She tagged the local news stations. She begged the community to boycott my consulting firm. She was digging a hole so deep, the sunlight would never reach her again. I went to sleep on Thursday night with a clear conscience and a steady heartbeat. I knew the truth always outlasts a loud lie. I woke up on Friday morning ready to finalize the week. I drove to the office, poured a cup of coffee, and sat at my desk. The morning was quiet and productive. The smear campaign was raging online, but inside my suite, everything was peaceful. Then the intercom on my desk chimed. "Belinda," Susan said, her voice sounding incredibly tight. "There is someone here to see you. He does not have an appointment, but he says it is urgent." "Who is it?" I asked, expecting an angry uncle or a confused distant cousin. "It is Brent Warren," she replied, "the groom." I sat back in my chair. The peace and quiet evaporated. The fallout from the meeting with his father had finally arrived at my front door. "Send him in," I said. I folded my hands on the desk and waited for the door to open. The grand illusion was about to shatter right in front of my eyes. The heavy glass door to my private office clicked shut. Brent Warren stood inside my suite. He looked nothing like the polished, confident groom who had stood at the altar just 6 days ago. His tailored navy suit was severely wrinkled, as if he had slept in it. Dark purple circles bruised the delicate skin under his eyes. His shoulders slumped forward, carrying the invisible weight of a man who had just watched his entire future disintegrate. He did not offer a greeting. He walked slowly across the plush carpet and collapsed into one of the leather guest chairs facing my desk. He rested his elbows on his knees and buried his face in his hands. He took a long, ragged breath that sounded dangerously close to a sob. I did not rush around the desk to comfort him. I did not offer him a tissue or a glass of water. I sat back in my ergonomic chair, folded my hands over my keyboard, and waited. In my line of work, silence is the best tool for extracting the truth. People will always fill a quiet room with their confessions. She lied about everything, Brent whispered. His voice was raw and hoarse. He dragged his palms down his face and looked up at me. His eyes were bloodshot. The trust fund, the business degree, the commercial properties. She even lied about the car she drives. I know, I said. My tone remained perfectly neutral. Brent shook his head, staring blankly at the mahogany grain of my desk. I thought she was just stressed about the wedding planning. Whenever the numbers did not add up, she cried and said I did not trust her. She told me she graduated with honors from the State University Business School. I found out yesterday she dropped out during her sophomore year. She told me she owned that European SUV outright. My father traced the vehicle identification number. It is a leased car registered to your personal banking account. He leaned back against the leather cushion and let out a hollow, bitter laugh. I bought the entire act. I introduced her to my grandmother. I gave her the diamond ring my grandfather brought back from Europe. I stood in front of 200 people and promised to share my life with a woman who does not actually exist. To understand how Brent fell for the facade, you have to understand the specific type of predator my sister is. Jessica possesses a terrifying ability to mirror the desires of her target. When she met Brent at a charity gala 2 years ago, she did not act like a tanning salon receptionist hunting for a rich husband. She researched his family. She bought a fake designer handbag online. She memorized the names of the board members on his father's real estate firm. She spoke confidently about market yields and property taxes, repeating terms she heard me use on phone calls. She crafted a bespoke personality designed specifically to bypass his defenses. My dad came home from your office on Monday afternoon, Brent continued, breaking my train of thought. He brought the color-coded files. He locked himself in his study for 3 hours. Then he called our corporate legal team. He called me into the room and laid out the bank transfers, the forged loan documents, and the police report you filed. Brent swallowed hard. His Adam's apple bobbed against his unbuttoned collar. I went back to our house. Jessica was still recording videos in the living room, crying into her phone camera about how you ruined her life. She was setting up ring lights while the police were actively investigating her for felony fraud. I did not offer a comforting platitude. I let him process the reality of his situation. I confronted her with the paperwork, Brent said, his voice hardening. The sadness in his eyes shifted into a cold, sharp anger. I asked her to explain the $85,000 loan. I asked her to explain the identity theft. Do you know what she did, Belinda? She tried to blame our parents, I guessed. She blamed everyone he corrected. She blamed your parents for being poor. She blamed you for being stingy and forcing her to find alternative funding. She told me she only forged the documents because she loved me so much and wanted to give me a wedding worthy of the Warren family name. She tried to frame a federal crime as an act of romantic devotion. He sat up straighter. The defeated groom vanished, replaced by the son of a ruthless billionaire real estate developer. The transition was immediate and chilling. He inherited his father's ability to compartmentalize a bad asset. My lawyer filed the annulment papers this morning at the county courthouse, Brent stated. The marriage is void. It is over. We were legally bound for less than 6 days. Her grand entrance into high society ended before we even received the professional wedding photographs. I nodded. It was the only logical outcome. The Warren family protected their wealth above all else. They were never going to allow a woman facing felony fraud charges to maintain access to their generational trust funds. Jessica had aimed for the stars and plummeted straight into the concrete. But Brent was not sitting in my office just to vent about his broken heart. He did not drive downtown merely to update me on his relationship status. He reached into the inner breast pocket of his wrinkled suit jacket. He pulled out a crisp, white, sealed envelope. The thick paper bore the embossed gold crest of his father's commercial real estate firm. He placed the envelope on the center of my desk and slid it slowly across the polished wood until it stopped inches from my keyboard. "My family does not like loose ends," Belinda Brent said. His voice dropped an octave, shifting from a grieving ex-husband to a calculated businessman negotiating a settlement. "And we despise being associated with felons." The local news stations are already sniffing around the catering disaster. If your parents go to trial for identity theft, the prosecutors will drag the wedding finances into the public record. Our family name will be plastered across the front page of every newspaper in Indiana, alongside the word fraud. I looked down at the embossed envelope, then back up at Brent. Inside that envelope is a cashier's check, drawn directly from my father's private holding account, Brent explained. It is made out to you. The amount is exactly $85,000. It covers the entirety of the fraudulent loan your parents took out in your name. Every single penny is accounted for. The quiet hum of the air conditioning unit seemed unnaturally loud in the tense silence of my office. I understood exactly what was happening. This was not an act of charity. This was a hush money transaction. "Take the check," Brent instructed. "Pay off the fraudulent bank loan today. Clear the debt from your credit profile. Once the bank is made whole, you are going to call Detective Miller at the Financial Crimes Division. You are going to tell him you found the missing funds. You will drop the police charges against your parents. You will withdraw the identity theft affidavit." He leaned forward, pressing his palms against the edge of my desk. "We want this scandal buried and gone before the weekend. We want your sister and your parents erased from our lives without a public trial. Take the money, Belinda. Let them walk away." The demand hung in the air, heavy with consequence. An $85,000 check sat on my desk, offering a clean, immediate escape from the crushing weight of my family's crimes. I could clear my name, fix my credit score, and never deal with the police precinct again. It was the easiest path forward. But taking that check meant protecting the very people who had betrayed me. It meant acting as their shield, one final time. I stared at the sealed envelope, the gold crest gleaming under the fluorescent lights, and prepared to give the Warren family my final answer. I stared at the sealed envelope resting on my polished mahogany desk. The thick white paper bore the gold crest of the Warren commercial real estate empire. Inside sat a cashier check for $85,000, the exact amount of the fraudulent loan my parents took out in my name, the exact price of my silence. I looked at the crisp rectangle. It represented an easy exit. If I accepted the funds, I could pay off the bank by 3 o'clock this afternoon. I could erase the crippling debt from my pristine credit profile. I could call Detective Miller down at the Financial Crimes Division and withdraw the criminal complaint. I could save my parents from the terrifying reality of federal prison, clear the Warren family name from the scandal, and walk away with a clean financial slate. It was the precise path the old Belinda would have taken without a second thought. For 29 years, my primary role in our household was the designated fixer. I was the responsible daughter expected to clean up their endless messes. When my father ordered too much inventory and bounced a commercial check, I transferred the funds from my savings to cover the severe overdraft penalties. When my mother maxed out her high-interest credit cards, buying designer clothes to impress the country club elite, I quietly paid the minimum balances so the relentless collection agencies would not call their home telephone. When the roof of their hardware store leaked and ruined thousands of dollars in stock, I hired the contractors and wrote the check. I had been trained since childhood to absorb their consequences. I was conditioned to believe that protecting the family reputation was my sole purpose in life. But the old Belinda died the moment Jessica shoved that scratchy polyester server uniform into my chest. She perished in the floral-scented bridal suite, while my mother smoothed her expensive gown and told me to hide in the kitchen like a shameful secret. The woman sitting behind the desk today did not owe them anything. I reached out and placed my fingertips on the envelope. I did not open it. I did not inspect the check to verify the amount. I slid the thick paper slowly across the smooth leather desk pad until it stopped directly in front of Brent. "I appreciate the generous offer, Brent," I said, keeping my voice steady and even, "but I do not take hush money, and I no longer protect people from the consequences of their own destructive actions." Brent stared at the envelope. His exhausted, bloodshot eyes widened in genuine shock. He had spent his entire life watching his wealthy father solve complex problems by writing large checks and demanding non-disclosure agreements. He assumed everyone had a price. He assumed my integrity was for sale, just like my sister's affection had been. "Belinda," he said, his voice tight with disbelief, "you need to think about this carefully. If you refuse this money and push the investigation forward, your parents could go to federal prison for wire fraud. The authorities do not treat identity theft lightly. They will face mandatory sentencing. They will lose everything they own." "Then they should not have committed wire fraud," I replied, my tone leaving zero room for negotiation. "The police report stands. My name stays on the sworn affidavit. I am not withdrawing the criminal charges, just to save your family from a temporary public relations headache. They made their choices. Now they will pay the toll." Brent sat frozen in the guest chair. He looked at me, truly seeing me for the first time since we met. He expected a greedy opportunist looking for a quick payday. He expected someone just like my sister. Instead, he found a woman who valued justice over cash. The desperate, panicked expression on his face slowly dissolved. A look of profound, quiet respect replaced it. He realized I was nothing like the grifters he had married into. He did not argue. He did not attempt to negotiate a higher amount. He reached out, picked up the envelope, and slid it back into the inner pocket of his wrinkled suit jacket. He stood up from the chair, nodded once in silent acknowledgement of my boundaries, and walked out of my office. The heavy glass door clicked shut. I sat alone in the quiet suite. I anticipated feeling a wave of guilt. I expected the familiar knot of anxiety to form in my stomach, the one that always appeared when I disappointed my parents. Instead, I felt a profound lightness. A suffocating weight lifted off my shoulders, leaving me able to breathe deeply for the first time in weeks. I was no longer the custodian of their lies. I was free. An hour later, the severe consequences of my refusal materialized in real time. I was reviewing a tax strategy spreadsheet for a local manufacturing client when my desk phone rang. It was not a business call or an angry relative trying to hurl insults. It was Sarah, the bakery owner, who had led the exodus out of the wedding reception on Saturday night. "Turn on the local noon news broadcast right now," Sarah instructed. Her tone was breathless, caught somewhere between shock and sweet vindication. "Channel 8, hurry! They are broadcasting live from your parents' street." I pulled up the local news station live stream on my computer monitor. The screen flickered, displaying a live feed from the commercial retail district on the edge of town. The camera pointed directly at the familiar brick facade of my parents' retail hardware store. The glowing neon open sign buzzed in the front display window, casting a red hue over the sidewalk. Two black and white police cruisers were parked diagonally across the front entrance, deliberately blocking the customer parking spaces. The red and blue emergency lights flashed bright and urgent in the midday sun. A crowd of neighboring shop owners, delivery drivers, and curious pedestrians had gathered on the sidewalk, holding up their cell phones to record the spectacle. The camera zoomed in just as the heavy glass front doors of the hardware store pushed open. Two uniformed police officers walked out into the sunlight. My father walked between them. His arms were pulled tight behind his back. Silver handcuffs glinted around his wrists, catching the glare of the sun. He was wearing his custom-embroidered business polo shirt, the exact garment he wore every day to project the image of a successful, wealthy community pillar. He looked terrified. His face was pale and slick with nervous sweat. He ducked his head, desperately trying to hide his face from the news cameras and the staring crowd of his peers. The officers guided him firmly toward the back seat of the nearest cruiser. He stumbled over the concrete curb, his polished leather shoes scuffing against the pavement. The dignified patriarch of the Martin family was reduced to a common criminal in broad daylight, surrounded by the very people he had spent years trying to impress. The news anchor provided a running commentary over the footage, stating that a prominent local business owner was being taken into custody regarding an ongoing federal financial fraud and identity theft investigation. The anchor mentioned that more arrests could follow, depending on the evidence seized from the property. The camera panned back to the storefront. Through the large display windows, I could see my mother. She was cowering in the dim light of the back office near the cash registers. She pressed her hands against her face, weeping uncontrollably as she watched her husband get loaded into a police vehicle. She did not rush outside to defend his honor. She hid in the shadows, terrified that the officers might possess a secondary arrest warrant with her name printed on it. The grand illusion they had spent decades building evaporated in less than 60 seconds on live television. The wealthy real estate investors, the successful entrepreneurs, the high society elite, it was all gone. The entire town was finally seeing them for exactly who they were. They were thieves wearing expensive clothes purchased with stolen credit. I watched the police cruiser pull away from the curb, its sirens wailing briefly as it merged into the heavy afternoon traffic. I did not shed a single tear. I closed the video stream, picked up my pen, and returned to my tax spreadsheet. My parents had played a dangerous game, betting their freedom on my endless loyalty and my willingness to absorb their damage. They lost the bet. But the highly publicized arrest was only the first major domino to fall. With the primary breadwinner sitting in a municipal holding cell and their community reputation burned to ash, the grim financial reality of their failing business was about to catch up with them. The commercial bank held the mortgage on their heavily leveraged suburban home. Without my secret monthly cash infusions to cover their staggering debts, the foreclosure process I had warned them about was accelerating faster than they could possibly anticipate. The eviction notices were already printing, and my mother was about to learn what happens when the money finally runs dry. The fallout from my father being escorted out of his retail storefront in silver handcuffs moved with brutal speed. When the primary breadwinner sits in a municipal holding cell, unable to post a $50,000 cash bond, the financial foundation crumbles fast. I am a consultant who deals with risk management every single day. I know exactly how commercial banks operate when a felony fraud charge hits the local news. They do not wait. They calculate their exposure and they call in the debts. My parents had structured their lives like a house of cards. They used their sprawling suburban home as collateral to secure the operating credit lines for their failing business. The second I stopped secretly funding their accounts, those credit lines defaulted. The bank initiated a cross-default protocol. By the second week of November, the foreclosure notices were nailed to the front door of their 5-bedroom estate. The social exile happened even faster than the legal ruin. My mother spent her entire adult life curating a pristine image among the local elite. She hosted charity luncheons and played tennis every Tuesday afternoon. But high society operates on a strict code of self-preservation. The moment the identity theft scandal broke, her supposed friends vanished. The country club board held an emergency session and revoked her membership, citing a morals clause in their bylaws. Her phone stopped ringing. The invitations ceased. She was marooned on an island of debt and public shame. I tracked the foreclosure proceedings through public county records. I did not step in to halt the process. I watched the legal machinery strip away the luxury lifestyle they had stolen from my credit profile. By the final Friday of the month, the county sheriff arrived at their manicured front lawn to execute the formal eviction order. That same evening, a fierce autumn storm rolled across the Indiana plains. The sky turned a bruised purple before breaking open. Cold rain lashed against the windows of my new home. I sat in my quiet living room, surrounded by furniture I purchased with honest money. A fire crackled in the hearth, casting a warm orange glow across the hardwood floor. I was reading a hardcover novel, enjoying the profound peace of a Friday night without a manufactured family crisis. At 8:30, the front doorbell chimed. I marked my page, set the book on the side table, and walked into the grand entryway. I peered through the glass sidelight next to the thick oak door. Standing on my covered porch was a woman who barely resembled the arrogant matriarch from the country club bridal suite. My mother stood shivering in the biting wind. She wore a tan trench coat soaked through at the shoulders. Rain dripped from her graying hair, flattening the expensive salon blowout she could no longer afford. Clustered around her feet were 3 large designer suitcases, their leather corners sitting in puddles of muddy water. I turned the deadbolt and pulled the door open. The freezing wind swept into my warm foyer, bringing the smell of wet asphalt and dead leaves. "Belinda," my mother gasped. Her voice shook, rattling in her chest. She took a step toward the threshold, assuming I would step aside to let her cross into my sanctuary. I planted my feet firmly on the welcome mat. I did not move an inch. "Please," she sobbed, wrapping her arms around her waist to ward off the chill. Dark streaks of expensive mascara ran down her pale cheeks, leaving jagged black lines across her jaw. The bank took everything today. The deputies made me leave the keys on the kitchen counter. I had to pack my entire life into 3 bags in less than an hour. I looked at the luggage. I recognized the matching set. I had purchased those exact suitcases for her birthday 3 years ago. "Your father is still sitting in county holding," she cried, her voice escalating into a frantic pitch. "The judge set his bail too high. We do not have the 10% required for the bondsman. His accounts are frozen pending the federal investigation. I have 0 cash. My credit cards are declining at the gas station. I have nowhere else to go. You have to let me move in." She reached out her wet, trembling fingers, grasping the edge of my doorframe. She looked at me with wide, desperate eyes. She expected the daughter she had trained to fix every disaster to fold. She assumed the sight of her tears would trigger my lifelong habit of rescuing her from her own terrible choices. I stood in the entryway and looked at the woman crying on my porch. I did not see a helpless victim of circumstance. I saw the person who had happily watched her favorite daughter humiliate me in front of 200 people. I remembered standing in the bridal suite, holding a scratchy server uniform, waiting for my mother to defend me. Instead, she had smoothed her stolen gown and ordered me to hide in the kitchen so I would not ruin the brand. She had loved the counterfeit wealth more than she ever loved me. "You own a beautiful home," she pleaded, her eyes darting past my shoulder to the warm, inviting light of my living room. "I will sleep in the guest room. I will not be a burden. I just need a place to stay until we figure out a legal strategy. We are family, Belinda. You cannot leave your own mother out in the freezing rain." Her words hung in the damp air. They were the same manipulative tactics she had deployed for 29 years. Guilt, obligation, the heavy chain of blood ties. But those chains had snapped the moment I sat across from Detective Miller and signed my name on the felony fraud report. The emotional leverage she relied on was gone. I looked her directly in the eyes. I kept my posture relaxed and my voice remarkably calm. I did not shout over the roaring wind. I delivered the truth with the precision of a surgeon. "You have a daughter, Mom," I said. She blinked, confused by the statement. Her mouth opened, but before she could formulate another excuse, I finished my thought. "Call Jessica." The realization hit her face like a physical strike. The fake tears stopped flowing. The desperate, pleading facade cracked, revealing the raw panic beneath. She knew exactly what I meant. She had chosen Jessica. She had funded Jessica. She had stolen my identity to elevate Jessica. Now she needed to reap the rewards of her favorite child. "But Belinda," she stammered, stepping back, "Jessica does not have a house. Her husband annulled the marriage. She lives in a tiny apartment." "Then she'd better clear some space for your suitcases," I replied. I did not wait for her to unleash another barrage of tears. I did not give her the opportunity to hurl insults or hurl guilt trips. I stepped back into my foyer. I pulled the heavy oak door shut. The thick wood clicked into the frame, cutting off the sound of her frantic voice. I reached up and turned the brass deadbolt. The lock slid into place with a heavy, satisfying thud. I stood in the entryway for a long moment. I listened to the rain lashing against the glass sidelight. I heard the faint, muffled sound of my mother dragging the wheels of her designer luggage across the wet concrete of my porch. The wheels bumped down the front steps one by one, growing fainter as she retreated down my driveway. I did not peer through the peephole to watch her leave. I turned around and walked back into my living room. The fire was still crackling in the hearth. The house felt incredibly secure. I walked into the kitchen and put the kettle on the stove. While the water heated, I selected a chamomile blend from the pantry. I poured the steaming water into a ceramic mug, inhaling the soothing, earthy aroma. I carried the tea back to my reading chair, sat down, and picked up my novel. I took a slow sip of the warm tea. I listened to the fierce storm raging outside the thick, insulated walls of my house. I scanned my own heart, searching for the familiar sting of guilt or the heavy burden of regret that used to govern my every decision. I found nothing. The emotional well was entirely dry. I felt a profound, untouchable peace. My mother was finally forced to turn to the daughter she had sacrificed everything to protect. She was about to discover the hard truth about the monster she had created. When a parasite runs out of fresh hosts, it turns on its own kind. The alliance built on stolen money and shared vanity was about to face the ultimate test of poverty. And Jessica was never known for her hospitality. My mother dragged her 3 soaking wet designer suitcases down my driveway in the freezing autumn rain. She reached the end of the cul-de-sac and used her dying cell phone battery to call a local cab service. When the driver arrived, he took one look at her smeared makeup and demanded cash up front. She had to dig through her expensive leather purse to find crumpled $20 bills just to secure a ride across town. She directed the driver to a rundown apartment complex on the east side of Indianapolis. She was heading to Jessica. My sister did not live in the sprawling Warren family estate. Brent had moved with ruthless speed to protect his assets. The morning after Richard Warren visited my office and saw the financial evidence, Brent changed the locks on their marital home. He packed Jessica's counterfeit designer handbags and cheap shoes into black garbage sacks and left them on the front porch for her to collect. With the annulment officially filed and her credit frozen due to the scandal, my sister had scrambled to find housing. She ended up signing a month-to-month lease on a cramped one-bedroom unit overlooking a noisy interstate highway. My mother dragged her luggage up 2 flights of outdoor concrete stairs. The wind whipped her wet hair across her face. She reached Unit 24 and pounded her fist against the cheap metal door. Jessica opened the door wearing stained sweatpants and an oversized t-shirt. Her roots were showing, and the arrogant bridal glow had vanished. "Let me in," my mother shivered, pushing her suitcases toward the threshold. "The bank seized the house today. Your father is still in jail. Belinda locked me out. I need to sleep on your couch." Jessica did not step aside to welcome her inside. She shifted her weight, planted her bare foot against the bottom of the door frame, and blocked the entrance. "You cannot stay here, Mom," Jessica said, her voice dripping with resentment. "I barely have enough space for my own things." My mother stared at her favorite child in disbelief. Rain dripped from her nose. "What do you mean I cannot stay here? I am your mother. We are family. I funded your entire life. I helped you get that wedding." Jessica scoffed, rolling her eyes. "And look how that turned out. You and Dad got arrested on live television. You ruined my marriage. Brent dumped me because he found out my parents are criminals. My social media followers are dropping by the thousands because people are calling my family a scam. You are toxic to my brand right now. I cannot have you dragging me down any further." "But I have zero money," my mother pleaded, her voice cracking. "My credit cards are declining. Where am I supposed to go?" "Figure it out," Jessica snapped. "You should have been smarter about hiding the paperwork from Belinda." My sister stepped back and slammed the metal door shut. The deadbolt clicked loudly in the hallway. My mother stood alone in the cold outdoor corridor, staring at the closed door of the daughter she had chosen over me. The golden child had only ever loved the gold. Without a trust fund or a credit card to offer, my mother possessed zero value to her. There is no loyalty among people who only worship status. The family that had bonded over using me as a doormat immediately tore each other apart the second the funding dried up. In a town like Carmel, secrets do not stay buried. The gossip surrounding the hallway confrontation spread rapidly. A neighbor in the apartment complex had heard the entire screaming match and shared the details with a hairdresser, who then shared it with everyone in her salon chair. Sarah, the bakery owner, relayed the story to me a few days later over a cup of coffee. She shook her head, marveling at the poetic justice. I listened to the tale and felt a quiet, profound validation. I did not have to lift a single finger to destroy their alliance. I just stepped out of the way and let their own selfish natures do the heavy lifting. With nowhere else to turn, my mother was forced to carry her designer luggage to a cheap residential motel on the outskirts of the city. The establishment charged a weekly rate and smelled permanently of stale cigarette smoke and industrial bleach. Her days of hosting charity luncheons and sipping mimosas on the country club patio were over. She now survives entirely on her meager Social Security checks. She heats up canned soup on a hot plate and watches a static-filled television in a room with a stained carpet. She spends her evenings realizing that the daughter she sacrificed everything for refuses to even answer her phone calls. Meanwhile, my father faced his own grim reality in the justice system. The federal prosecutor assigned to his case built a watertight prosecution based on the Internet protocol logs and the forged loan documents I provided. The evidence was insurmountable. My father's court-appointed public defender advised him that if he took the case before a jury, he would likely face a decade in federal prison. My father was a coward. He could not handle the thought of a prison cell. He accepted a harsh plea deal to avoid a public trial. He stood before a federal judge and pleaded guilty to felony identity theft. The judge stripped away his remaining dignity, lecturing him in open court about stealing from his own flesh and blood. My father received 3 years of supervised probation. He lost his right to vote. He lost his ability to own a firearm, and the court handed him a staggering restitution order, requiring him to pay back the bank every single month until the $85,000 debt was settled. Without access to commercial credit lines, the hardware store was immediately liquidated. The bank auctioned off the remaining inventory to cover a fraction of the outstanding commercial mortgage. The business he had used to project his fake CEO status was gone. To meet his court-ordered monthly payments and avoid violating his probation, my father had to find immediate employment. No reputable firm in Indiana would hire a convicted financial felon to manage their books or oversee their operations. His resume was useless. The man who used to wear custom-embroidered shirts and look down on blue-collar workers now clocks in for the overnight shift at a massive big-box home improvement store. He wears a bright orange safety vest. He spends his nights pushing a wide industrial broom down the concrete aisles, sweeping up sawdust and spilled nails. His supervisors are 22-year-old kids who write him up if he takes an extra 5 minutes on his break. Last week, a former client of mine mentioned seeing him at the store. The client had walked in late to buy a plumbing fixture and spotted my father stocking shelves in the hardware aisle. My father had recognized the man, dropped his boxes, and scrambled into the employee break room to hide his face in shame. Their overwhelming pride had cost them their kingdom. They traded their family, their home, and their freedom just to finance a hollow illusion for a daughter who abandoned them at the first sign of trouble. I watched the dust settle from a safe distance, focusing my energy on expanding my consulting firm and furnishing my new house. The holiday season was approaching, and my business was thriving. I assumed the toxic chapter of my life was permanently closed. I thought Jessica had finally learned that she could no longer extract resources from my bank account. But a desperate narcissist never truly surrenders. When their schemes fail and their enablers are gone, they always try to circle back to their original target. 6 months after the wedding disaster, the chill of winter gave way to early spring. I was sitting at a corner table in my favorite downtown coffee shop, reviewing a highly profitable quarterly report on my laptop. The bell above the glass door chimed. I did not look up immediately, assuming it was just another commuter grabbing their morning espresso. Then a shadow fell across my screen. I raised my head and found myself looking at the very last person I ever expected to see in public again. The peace I had enjoyed for half a year
was about to be interrupted. Half a year slipped by. The harsh, bitter winter faded into a crisp Indiana spring. The snow melted from the sidewalks of downtown Indianapolis, leaving the streets bright and clear. The suffocating tension that had defined my entire existence was gone. Without the constant, draining presence of my family manufacturing daily crises, I found myself breathing easier. I was no longer waiting for a panicked phone call. I was no longer checking my bank accounts to see how much money had vanished to cover a bounced check. My life belonged entirely to me. I sat at a small round table in the corner of my favorite independent coffee shop on Massachusetts Avenue. Morning sunlight streamed through the large front windows, casting a warm glow over the exposed brick walls. The rich, earthy scent of roasted espresso beans and toasted pastries filled the air. The shop hummed with the gentle noise of professionals typing on keyboards and baristas calling out orders. I held a ceramic mug of dark roast coffee in my left hand, while my right hand scrolled through a highly profitable quarterly report on my laptop screen. My consulting firm was thriving. Severing the financial umbilical cord to my parents had allowed me to reinvest my earnings into my own business. I had hired 3 new junior partners to handle the influx of clients. My revenue charts reflected exponential growth. I was focused, energized, and deeply content. The brass bell mounted above the heavy glass entrance door chimed. I did not look up immediately. I kept my eyes on the spreadsheet, calculating a tax projection for a new commercial client. Then a shadow fell across the surface of my wooden table, blocking the sunlight. I raised my head, expecting to see a waiter offering a water refill, or a stranger asking to borrow the empty chair across from me. I found myself looking at a ghost. Jessica stood on the opposite side of the table. The shock of her appearance registered in my mind before I even processed her identity. She looked nothing like the radiant, arrogant bride who had commanded the bridal suite at the luxury country club. The curated high society facade had crumbled into dust. Her normally pristine blonde hair hung limp and unstyled around her face, showing dark roots near her scalp. She wore a faded, oversized gray sweater that was fraying near the cuffs, paired with plain denim jeans. Her boots were scuffed. Her posture, which used to radiate unearned superiority, was slouched and defeated. Dark, hollow circles framed her eyes. She looked exhausted, carrying the heavy, visible toll of a woman who had lost her primary funding source and her social standing in the exact same week. She spotted the recognition in my eyes. She hesitated. For a fraction of a second, I saw her old pride flare up. She hated standing there. She despised the fact that she was wearing cheap clothes in front of the sister she used to mock for buying off-the-rack dresses. Her ego warred with her desperation, battling right there in the middle of the coffee shop. Desperation won. She took a step closer, marching over to my table with a stiff, rigid gait. She did not have the energy to yell. She did not attempt to put on a fake smile or pretend this was a casual sisterly reunion. She placed her bare, unmanicured hands on the back of the empty wooden chair. "Belinda," she said. Her voice was tight, raspy, and stripped of all its former confidence. It was the sound of a person who had hit the bottom of a very deep well. I did not offer her a greeting. I did not ask her to sit down. I kept my hands resting on the edge of my laptop keyboard and waited for her to reveal the purpose of her visit. "I cannot make rent this month," Jessica whispered, her words rushing out in a frantic, uneven rhythm. She gripped the top of the chair, her knuckles turning white. She refused to meet my gaze, staring instead at the glowing screen of my computer. Brent threw me out onto the street. His lawyers were ruthless. They drafted the annulment papers and threatened to turn over all my text messages to the federal prosecutor handling Dad's wire fraud case if I tried to fight for alimony. They forced me to sign a total surrender. She paused, taking a shallow, ragged breath. The tanning salon fired me because the local news stations aired our last name during the police raid on the hardware store. Nobody in Carmel will hire me. The country club girls blocked my phone number. I had to move into a terrible apartment complex near the interstate, and the landlord is posting an eviction notice on my door tomorrow morning. The annulment left me with nothing, and my credit is destroyed because my name is tied to the family business collapse. She finally lifted her head and looked directly into my eyes. The entitlement she usually wore like a crown was replaced by raw, naked begging. "I need a loan," she pleaded, her voice cracking. "Just $5,000, just enough to keep a roof over my head and buy some groceries until I find a job." "You have it, Belinda. I know how much money your firm brings in. $5,000 is pocket change for you. Please." She stood there waiting for the familiar dynamic to click into place. For nearly 3 decades, a distressed family member crying about money would trigger an automatic rescue response in my brain. I had been conditioned to open my wallet the moment a relative shed a tear. Jessica expected the guilt to wash over me. She expected the dutiful, obedient older sister to pull out a checkbook and fix her mistakes. I sat still in my chair. I scanned my own heart, searching for a shred of empathy or a flicker of obligation. I found an empty room. The trauma bond was broken. I observed the frantic woman standing across from me the way a pedestrian observes a stranger asking for spare change. I reached forward with both hands. I grasped the top edge of my laptop screen and pulled it downward. The hinge moved smoothly. The computer clicked shut, silencing the quiet hum of the cooling fan. I folded my hands together and rested them on the closed metal lid. I looked at the sibling who had shoved a black polyester vest into my chest. I remembered the heavy scent of imported lilies. I remembered the sound of my mother telling me to hide in the kitchen so I would not ruin the brand. I remembered the $85,000 forged signature designed to trap me in their debt forever. "I am not a bank, Jessica," I said softly. The words hung in the warm air of the cafe, sharp and definitive. "I am just a caterer, remember? And I am officially off the clock." Her face crumpled. The last remaining fragment of her hope shattered, sending physical tremors through her shoulders. Her jaw dropped. She opened her mouth to argue, to launch into a guilt trip, to weaponize our childhood memories, or to scream about unfairness. She wanted to pull me back into the chaotic drama that had fueled her entire existence. But she met my gaze. She searched my eyes for a crack in the foundation, a sign of weakness she could exploit. She saw a brick wall. She saw the absolute finality of a door that had been permanently welded shut. There was no rage in my expression, no bitterness she could use to play the victim. There was only cold, indifferent truth. The realization washed over her, heavy and suffocating. The well was dry. The ATM was unplugged. The sister she had treated like dirt was never going to catch her again. Jessica closed her mouth. She released her tight grip on the wooden chair. She turned around, her head hanging low, and walked slowly toward the exit. She pushed the heavy glass door open, stepping out into the crisp, windy street. She did not look back. I watched her figure retreat down the sidewalk until she turned the corner and disappeared into the sprawling city. I reached forward and opened my laptop. The screen flickered to life, illuminating the profitable quarterly report. I picked up my coffee mug, took a long sip of the warm, dark roast, and turned my attention back to the numbers. The transaction was over. My ledger was perfectly balanced. I spent a few more minutes at the cafe finalizing the tax projections for my client. When I finished, I packed my computer into my leather tote bag, left a generous tip for the barista, and walked out into the bright spring morning. I walked toward my office building, my heels clicking a steady, confident rhythm against the pavement. The city felt vibrant and full of possibility. Severing the dead weight of my past had created a massive vacuum in my life, and I was eager to fill that empty space with a future I actually desired. The destruction of their fake empire was complete, paving the way for the foundation of my real one. Walking away from Jessica that morning changed the trajectory of my entire year. I did not allow the betrayal to harden my heart. I used the pain to sharpen my boundaries. With the endless financial drain of my family finally severed, my accounting firm experienced unprecedented growth. For 4 years, a significant portion of my hard-earned profits had vanished into the bottomless pit of my parents' failing retail business. Now, every single dollar stayed within my own ledgers. The surplus capital allowed me to expand my operations far beyond my original corporate projections.
By late summer, my client roster had doubled in size. The demand for my consulting services grew so high that I signed a lease for the adjoining office suite. I hired contractors to knock down the dividing wall, creating a sprawling, modern workspace with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the downtown skyline. I posted job listings and conducted rigorous interviews. I hired 3 highly skilled junior partners to help manage the heavy workload. I selected a brilliant estate planner, a seasoned corporate tax specialist, and a sharp risk assessment analyst. We functioned together like a well-oiled machine. The atmosphere in our expanded suite was focused, professional, and energized. It was entirely free from the chaotic interruptions I used to endure when my mother would barge into my lobby demanding emergency cash to cover her bounced checks. I also channeled my new resources into my personal sanctuary. I contacted a real estate broker and purchased a beautiful 10-acre parcel of land just outside the city limits. The property featured rolling green hills, ancient oak trees, and a quiet winding creek near the back property line. I hired a talented architect and a crew of reliable contractors to build a custom home. I spent my weekends walking through the wooden framing, breathing in the rich scent of fresh-cut pine and damp earth. I picked out solid walnut flooring, thick granite countertops, and wide windows that let the natural sunlight pour into every single room. I was no longer spending my Saturdays managing other people's manufactured crises. I was not fielding panicked phone calls from angry vendors or bailing reckless relatives out of bad legal contracts. I was pouring concrete for a foundation that belonged solely to me. When the construction finished in early autumn, I stood in the center of my new living room and listened to the profound silence. No one had a spare key. No one could demand entry. My hard-earned peace was securely locked behind a solid oak door. Thriving in my own life was incredibly satisfying, but I realized I needed to turn my painful lessons into a shield for others. I remembered the chilling, terrifying sensation of discovering the forged loan documents on my credit report. I wanted to ensure other young women in Indiana never felt that specific brand of helplessness. I partnered with a local community center and launched a pro bono financial literacy program. Every Tuesday evening, I stood in front of a classroom filled with young women entering the workforce. I taught them how to read complex bank statements and spot hidden predatory fees. I showed them how to place security freezes on their Social Security numbers to prevent identity theft. I explained the severe legal dangers of co-signing loans for unreliable relatives or romantic partners. One evening, a 19-year-old girl brought me a lease agreement her older boyfriend wanted her to sign. I reviewed the hidden clauses and showed her the financial trap buried in the fine print. Watching her tear the contract into pieces gave me a deeper sense of accomplishment than any corporate dividend ever could. I had finally stopped trying to heal people who loved being sick. I was directing my energy toward people who actually wanted to learn and grow. The community that had walked out of the country club with me became my true support system. They did not just offer empty words of encouragement. They showed up in my daily life. When my firm hosted our annual holiday party in December, I did not hire a faceless corporate catering company. I hired Sarah, the local bakery owner who had led the exodus from the bridal suite. She arrived with trays of incredible food, her face beaming with genuine pride and friendship. There were no cheap polyester uniforms at my event. There were no forced seating arrangements designed to impress shallow socialites. The business leaders I had saved from bankruptcy raised their glasses to toast my continued success. We stood around the room sharing stories and laughing until our sides ached. I looked at the people filling my office. I learned a vital lesson that evening. True family is not determined by shared bloodlines or a sense of lifelong unearned obligation. It is determined by mutual respect, unwavering honesty, and the courage of the people who stand up and walk out the door alongside you when you are being disrespected. I had lost a toxic family, but I had gained an empire of loyal friends. My new life was thriving, but the past rarely stays buried without a final fight. It is now late November.
The crisp autumn air carries the sharp scent of wood smoke and the promise of upcoming snow. The Thanksgiving holiday is just a few days away. I decided to host a large dinner at my new custom home, inviting Sarah Brent and a dozen other close friends who had supported me through the chaos of the past year. The menu is planned, the walnut dining table is polished to a high shine, and the house feels warm and inviting. But yesterday afternoon, the peaceful rhythm of my new life was interrupted. A strange, beat-up sedan parked at the very end of my long private driveway. It sat idling near my stone mailbox for nearly an hour before speeding away into the fading daylight. Then this morning, my receptionist Susan walked into my office. Her face was pale and her posture was rigid. She held a thick, unsealed envelope that a private courier had just dropped off at the front desk. The return address in the top left corner was completely blank, but the handwriting across the center of the paper was unmistakable. The frantic cursive loops were identical to the forged signature on the fraudulent loan application from over a year ago. The ghost of my family was trying to breach my fortress just in time for the holidays. They were testing the perimeter, searching for a weak point in the armor I had spent the last 12 months building. I stared at the envelope resting on my desk, feeling a familiar surge of adrenaline course through my veins. The final holiday reckoning was approaching, and I was about to show them exactly who controls the table now. The thick envelope sat on the mahogany desk in my home office for 2 full days. I did not open it right away. I did not allow my curiosity to dictate my actions or disrupt the peaceful rhythm I had spent a year building. The handwriting on the front was unmistakable, but the person who wrote it no longer possessed any power over my emotional life. On Wednesday afternoon, the day before Thanksgiving, I finally picked up a silver letter opener. I sliced through the top of the paper and pulled out the single sheet tucked inside. It was a letter from my mother. Her handwriting, once neat and refined, was now uneven and shaky. She wrote from the cheap residential motel room where she spent her days. She described the damp carpet and the thin walls. She complained about the noise from the nearby highway and the lack of fresh air. She wrote 3 pages about her suffering, detailing every hardship she had endured since the bank seized her suburban home. Near the end of the letter, the true purpose of her message revealed itself. She asked if she could come to my house for Thanksgiving dinner. She claimed she missed her family. She wrote that the holiday season was a time for forgiveness and new beginnings. She suggested that we put the past behind us and start fresh, as if 12 years of financial exploitation and identity theft could be erased by a warm meal. Not once in those 3 pages did she offer an apology. She did not express remorse for the $85,000 fraudulent loan. She did not mention the server uniform she had ordered me to wear in front of 200 guests. She did not express regret for standing by while my sister launched a public smear campaign to ruin my professional reputation. She simply wanted access to the comfort, stability, and wealth she had once taken for granted. She wanted a seat at a table she had done everything in her power to break. I did not cry. I did not feel the familiar surge of guilt that used to control my decisions. I folded the paper back into its original creases, walked down the hallway to my kitchen, and dropped the letter directly into the recycling bin under the sink. The door swung shut, and the matter was closed. The morning of Thanksgiving arrived crisp and bright over the Indiana countryside. Sunbeams poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my new home, illuminating the rich grain of the solid walnut dining table I had custom-ordered from a local woodworker. The table was vast and sturdy, built to last for generations. Unlike the mahogany dining room table in my parents' home, this one was entirely round. There was no head of the table. There was no place of honor reserved for an arrogant matriarch. Every single seat offered the exact same view, the exact same comfort, and the exact same respect. By 3 o'clock in the afternoon, the quiet house was filled with the rich, comforting aromas of roasted turkey, savory stuffing, and sweet pumpkin pie. My kitchen hummed with activity, but there was zero tension. There was no frantic shouting over unapproved recipes, no anxiety about protocol, and no fear of failing an invisible test. The doorbell chimed, and I opened the front door to welcome my guests. Sarah, the bakery owner, who had led the walkout from my sister's wedding reception, walked in carrying a massive platter of artisanal dinner rolls. Her husband followed close behind, holding a box of fresh apple tarts. A few minutes later, the 3 junior partners from my accounting firm arrived with their families, bringing laughter and armfuls of side dishes. The local business leaders, whose balance sheets I had rescued from bankruptcy, filled the entryway, their warm voices echoing through the high ceilings. Around 4 o'clock, a dark luxury sedan pulled into my driveway. Brent Warren stepped out, wearing a sharp sweater and a relaxed smile. The exhausted, beaten-down groom who had sat in my office 6 months ago was completely gone. The annulment was long finalized, and he had spent the last half year rebuilding his life away from my sister's web of lies. He walked up the front steps and handed me a bottle of rare, expensive wine. We had surprisingly become good friends after the legal dust settled, bound by the shared experience of surviving my family's financial grift. There were no catering uniforms in my house. There were no seating hierarchies dictated by wealth or social status. There was only the genuine warmth of people who respected one another. We gathered around the massive walnut table. 14 chairs were filled with people who actually mattered. I watched Sarah pass a heavy bowl of roasted vegetables to my senior tax analyst. I listened to Brent share a funny story about his father's latest commercial real estate deal, setting off a wave of genuine laughter around the room. The space was alive with the honest, unscripted sounds of a real family. My cell phone sat on the granite island in the kitchen. At 5:15, while I was pouring glasses of sparkling cider for the younger guests, the device buzzed quietly against the stone. I walked over and picked up the phone. The screen lit up with a notification. It was a text message sent from an unknown number, but the phrasing was instantly recognizable. It was my mother. She typed that she was sitting alone in her motel room with a microwave dinner. She asked if I could set aside a plate of leftovers for her, suggesting that I drop the food off at her door later that evening. I stared at the glowing text on the screen. A year ago, that message would have paralyzed me. I would have felt the heavy, suffocating pressure of maternal expectation. I would have spent the rest of the evening feeling like a failure of a daughter, debating whether to drive across town just to keep the peace. I looked up from the screen and looked out at my dining room. I saw Sarah laughing with my junior partners. I saw Brent enjoying a quiet conversation with a local business owner. I saw a room full of people who had stood up for me when my own bloodline chose to humiliate me. I tapped the screen once to delete the text message. I blocked the unknown number permanently. Then I opened the wooden kitchen drawer, slid the phone inside, and pushed the drawer shut, locking out the noise of the past. I walked back into the bright, warm dining room and took my place at the walnut table. I lifted my glass of champagne into the air, catching the amber sunlight streaming through the window. A toast to the people who choose to stand beside us, I said, my voice steady and clear. 14 glasses raised in unison, clinking softly above the homemade food. For 29 years, I believed my value was tied to my ability to absorb the damage created by people who never cared about my well-being. I thought I had to earn a seat at my mother's table, swallowing insults and paying off bad debts just to be tolerated. It took a scratchy polyester server uniform and a forged $85,000 loan for me to realize the ultimate truth. You cannot fix people who benefit from the very chaos they create. You cannot negotiate with parasites who view your success as their personal property. Sometimes the only way to win a rigged game is to step away from the board entirely. Stop being the shock absorber and build your own table from the ground up. I took a sip of my champagne and looked around the room at the loud, unranked, genuine family I had chosen for myself. My house was warm, my boundaries were unbreakable, and my life was finally my own.